If you live with the constant fear and shame of saying, I have borderline personality disorder with your out loud voice, anxiety ridden that you might be locked up if you do, if you've ever felt so alone and isolated thinking, there's no other person on the planet that can understand what I go through every minute of every hour, and the message playing on repeat in your head is, I can't do anything right. If you have frequent thoughts of, I don't matter, everyone will be happier if I'm not around, I should just end it, only to fumble those efforts too, you're not alone, and you've come to the right place. Welcome to I Can't Even Kill Myself Right, your safe space. Here we offer a raw, slightly humorous, and compassionate inside look at what it's like to be a BPD warrior, while demonstrating this disability is not a life sentence. And oh yeah, there's some learning and mindfulness nuggets too. Before we jump into today's episode, it's important to know there might be explicit language and content that could possibly be distressing or triggering. If you choose to listen, please consider using the resources on our website, showmegrace.org, to reset. Please take care of yourself and don't be afraid to seek help if triggered. Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's show. And in today's show, we are honored to have the most special of guests today, a superhero of sorts who's been standing up for people with borderline personality disorder and their loved ones for 30 plus years. Yep. She started when she was 4. And I am going to allow her to introduce herself to our lovely audience. Hey, Miss Valerie.
Thank you so much. That was the most adorable introduction I've ever heard. My name is Valerie Porr. I started Tara in 1993-94 when I met Marshall Linehan. I had become familiar with BPD. Somebody in my family was afflicted with this, and I couldn't understand it. I didn't understand it, and I was at that point, believe it or not, a fashion designer, doing couture clothes and all those red carpet things. But I had a science background from school. I was a biology major, and I am not 34, but I was old enough to think that I couldn't go to medical school because I didn't know a girl who was a doctor. So I took a different path. And when this happened, I went to the science right away. And as I tried to figure out what this was all about, it just never made any sense. And we started a helpline right away, and we kept data on every call from the helpline. And I started to see patterns in the way people were responding to their loved ones and in the way their loved ones were reacting. In many cases, I could match the behavior to the science. But there was something about it all that just kept hitting me in the face. It was that these people had, the people who we would be calling borderline or whatever they were being stigmatized with, had certain traits or factors in common. And I was just kind of obsessed with where did that come from and why was there so much similarity?
I love that. And we're so grateful that you did and that passion bug bit you. I hate the I guess the BPD adjacence of it all, that you had to, experience that through way of a loved one, but we're still really, I guess I just can't stop using the word honored that you really did go down that path, because your information really has helped me, especially so much when I was thinking about the mission and purpose for my own nonprofit. And even just the way that the direct approach in which your communication, data trumps emotion every time. And so first thing that spoke to me when I started going down the rabbit hole of your website was like everything was right there in your face. Transparency is key. And that really resonated with me. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
The problem with the entire field that your audience is being confronted with is that things that are unusual to a certain type of people. I don't know, when Mark Zuckerberg talks, or what's his name, Elon Musk talks, I don't know if everybody understands them. I certainly don't. They have a different mindset. And the problem with this field is that the doctors didn't understand this. And I think doctors are like anybody else. When they can't help people, when they fail to cure the people, they don't want to say, I'm inadequate, I couldn't do it, I failed. I started hearing words like treatment resistant. That was one of those words that blew me away. Why would somebody who's suffering and unhappy and so on and so forth want to continue to be like this? Why would you call them treatment resistant? Because otherwise you have to say, I didn't know how to help them. And what I've come to see is that this field is so stigmatized, and the stigma comes from the professionals. The stigma comes from the psychiatric community. The stigma comes from the doctor. And when we go to conferences, we get a badge, and our badges say Tara for borderline personality disorder. And my colleague says that our badges are stop signs, because when people see our badge, they go, I'm talking about top researchers and psychiatrists and clinicians. Oh, borderline, I wouldn't treat them. Oh, I don't let them in my practice. No, they're so difficult. And every time I am put on the spot to have to correct them and talk to them. And I have been doing that for 30 years. And I'm sad to say it hasn't changed very much.
That's so, you talk about badges, and it was like right in the top of my mind where I was like, the shame badge that we have to wear once we say out loud that's this awful monster of an illness, right? But I feel like, just like you said, everyone should take accountability. So I wish we could put the shame badges on these professionals, these doctors that, just refuse to see that it's not a one-size-fits-all approach to this particular journey. And so I wholeheartedly agree with you. And I can understand why they would see you as a stop sign, because you have the data and the facts to back it up. So
it gets so angry with me. I cannot begin to tell you.
I'm like, oh God, here she goes again. No.
Some of them actually respect me, and some of them tell me that they appreciate what I've been doing. But the other day I was at a meeting about some kind of advocacy effort, and there was a pretty good doctor there who's done some good research. And I looked at him and I said, this is an organization that's supposed to be about BPD. I said, why can't you doctors put out a sheet that says these are things that you are saying about BPD that are incorrect, like tell the parents to say neutral when they're upset, which is like taking the bull and waving red flags in front of it and be surprised when he charges. I gave him a list of things he could say, like telling people, oh, you can't diagnose him until he's 18, when they changed that 25 years ago.
Wow.
So when I asked him that, I gave him a couple of lists of actual fact things that if the research community of BPD were to help the lived experience in the families, they would stand up and say, no, that's not true about borderlines. They're not manipulated. They're not doing this. They're not doing that. And this man, when I said that, one person cut me off, and the man said nothing. He said, we're making progress.
But with his out loud voice.
We're making progress. And I mean, is it so hard to put out a sheet and say, we're the organization of researchers in this field, and this is what we want you all to know?
Yes, because it's almost like with the government, you wish sometimes you're like, just ask the people. It's not going to take anything away from your ego and what you know and are good at. But if you ask the people or get them involved in what they need, sometimes you might catch a nugget or two. Sometimes it just might be an answer in there.
Well, Nicole, I guess I have a very big confusion in my mind. As I said, I was a designer, and I live in Soho in New York, and I live in the artist community, and I knew so many artists who died of AIDS, and I saw the AIDS epidemic decimate the community that I lived in and people I knew and cared for. Famous people, talented people, good people, they died of AIDS. And I watched that community stand up for itself and do things that threw it in the face of everyone. And I don't know why I'm standing in a conference by myself talking to 3,000 doctors and nobody is backing me up. And that's where I need all you guys to come up and scream.
Yes.
Because I just, and I try to understand that. And I think that it's the stigma, both to that all the families caused it. Well, I'm sure every family in the world is wonderful, but there's a lot of good families who are suffering and love their children and love their loved ones and really want to help, but don't know how. But to be social, the borderlines are shamed, Nicole, 300%, 500%. And they have shame naturally. And to be shamed by what they're living with is a tragedy. But the families are shamed. The families are made to feel like they caused it, that they're terrible, that they're bad. And that combination has taken the guns away from advocacy for this disorder.
Can you say a little bit more about what the role of like the evolution, genes, culture, kind of how that all makes up what we call BPD?
Well, as I said, I kept data on the helpline and I found this commonality. And I've turned into a nerd. When Nova comes on the TV and it's about insects and butterflies. And
it's my love language.
Watch them all. And I did graduate with science degrees. I even taught general science for a while. And if everyone wants a little ism to live by, there is nothing happens in nature by accident. Everything in nature, there's a reason for it to happen. I was watching a program about butterflies and how the caterpillar turns into a butterfly. And when I heard that the caterpillar the forms a thing, a little cocoon before the butterfly comes out. And when the caterpillar comes out, it comes out on exactly the kind of leaves that it needs to eat to develop. Nothing happens for nothing. Why were these people so sensitive to light, to sound, to facial expressions, to temperature, to textures, to all of these things? Why were they so many of them say, I'm not safe? What did that mean? Well, I found a wonderful book, if I'm allowed to give a book's title. It's called Good Reasons for Bad Feelings, or for Feeling Bad. It's by Randolph Ness. It's Nesse. And let's imagine that we are average number of people in a tribe in evolutionary times when you were a caveman was 10 to 15 people. Well, there's 10 or 15 people trying to get their way through the forest or the desert or the swamp. What was their purpose for being there? Well, they had two purposes. They had to survive, and they had to procreate. Because if they didn't procreate, it's the ozone. So what were they dealing with as they were running through the forest? Well, snakes and tigers and poisons and things falling down and natural disasters and so on. Well, who survived? Well, if you were dozing off and you didn't hear the tiger tramping by and that was going to come and take your head off, you'd be dead. But if you had acute hearing and acute sensitivity to smell, you'd get alert right away and you'd know that tiger was there. And you have a system in your body, we all know it, it's called fight or flight. It would roll into action and you would do something. You'd climb a tree, you'd run away, you'd wake up everybody else. You would do something. So in psychobabble world, it's called hypervigilance. And people with BPD, by data, are hypervigilant. Well, why are they hypervigilant? Because from evolution, they're the survivors. So I started to look at my surroundings. I live in Manhattan. I live in Soho, a very big tourist area, a very big shopping area. Saturdays and Sundays is filled with people. The caveman was running around in a very quiet forest. Hypervigilance on the New York subway is not an advantage. So I began to see that the wonderful qualities of people with BPD, sensitivity, hypervigilance, awareness, were against them in today's society. And that doesn't mean they're crazy. It doesn't mean they're bad. It doesn't mean they're doing something wrong. It means they're different, and their difference is not recognized as an advantage in today's world. And the way
Ooh, that's golden. Difference is not recognized as an advantage in today's world. That's a t-shirt.
Well, the point is, I'm older. So my mother said, you mustn't learn to type, because if you learn to type, you'll become a stenographer, and I want you to go to college, blah, blah, blah. Well, comes the age of computers. I couldn't type. I don't know how to type. I have degrees. I have studied all these things. But typing, to this day, if you're sitting in my office, you'll hear me go, Esther, come over here, help me. Why? I can't manage the computer the way you guys do. Because it's not my generation, and it's not something that was part of my life. That's the way I see this. When I teach my classes, I found two pictures. One picture is of a beautiful, garden and wonderful greens, and the picture you have in back of you, of this beautiful water, of trees blowing in the wind. The other picture is my neighborhood on Saturday afternoon with cars going busting the horns, or the garment center in New York where people used to walk pushing carts with dresses.
I'm already having a reaction to that one.
So the point is, well, for your audience, I'm going to give you an example that really upsets me. Okay, because everyone understands what I mean by hypervigilance. It means being super aware of your surroundings and noticing the music is too loud or this smells bad. In your audience, if anybody's there has been diagnosed with that famous disorder of ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
What is ADHD? Okay, let's be a kid, 4 or 5 years old, and mom and dad send you to preschool or to kindergarten. But let's say you are, don't give it a diagnosis, you're hypervigilant and you're hypersensitive. Well, you walk into this classroom and you've never been away from mom. The most you've been around is 2 or 3 kids in a play date. And now there's 15 kids in the class, or 20 or 10 or whatever, but more than you're used to.
Okay.
Little kids are moving around. So some kid is shaking around, and some kid is bopping, and some kid is sitting a pen on the desk. And some kid peed in his pants, and it smells. And another kid has lunch that his mother sent, but from his culture, he's got some cheese or something in there that really smells that you're not used to, and so on. And some kid has a very loud voice. Some kid is whispering. Now you have to kind of filter that all out. It's overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And then the teacher says, Joey, come to the blackboard. How much is 1 and 1? Well, you get scared out of your mind and you get embarrassed, and maybe you don't know yet. Maybe you haven't developed that. And what's the emotion that comes up then? The emotion you mentioned, shame. Mm-hmm. And then we say, oh, this child has attention deficit disorder. Start with that. Start with that. And I could go through half the DSM and explain it from that point of view.
Wow.
Yeah.
How many people do you share that with in your classes? Do you get to actually see the aha moment or like that light bulb when you give it to them in that perspective?
Almost all.
I would imagine.
Almost all. Almost all. Another one, borderlines are impulsive. Okay. Impulsive means you just do something without any thinking. You just do something.
Nuh-uh. No, we're not.
No.
I impulsively take issue with the statement.
Oh, the other one is dysregulated emotions. Okay. I don't know. 32 years I'm doing this. I don't know what a dysregulated emotion is, but I see it constantly in literature. So people with BPD can be totally calm, lovely, and wonderful until somebody comes along and rattles their cage. In other words, triggers them.
Mm-hmm.
So somebody says something to you and they've undermined you or they've humiliated you. They've brought up shame or they've asked you to do something that you can't do or you don't want to do or you feel like they're controlling you. You are a human being. You react. You were not reacting before they said that to you, but you reacted to the immediate context of the situation. Like the guy in the forest primeval who heard the noise that the elephant was coming or the tiger was coming, and he reacted. Would you say the caveman was impulsive? I mean,
he was surviving, right?
Exactly. And so we either say he's impulsive or he has bipolar disorder because his mood changed quickly.
Mm-hmm. Heard that one before.
So these are the stories about BPD that we've been trying to counter for 30 years. The research is there.
Well, why do you think the incidence of these BPD has increased so much in like present culture?
Well, Peter Fonagy, who developed mentalization-based therapy, which I totally adore, it's the best therapy available. He said all the problems came about with the invention of the steam engine. And you have to kind of, I watch a lot of TV, and if you watch TV about like the 1900s or the 1800s, you watch Little Women or some kind of programs. Life was much simpler 100 years ago, 150 years ago. Life was much more regimented. There were rules and regulations for things. People followed those rules. You didn't do this. You wore this kind of dress. You spoke this way. Classes. And additionally, people lived with extended family. So, for example, if you had 5 brothers and sisters and you lived in Ireland, your 5 brothers and sisters all lived near each other and they all had wives and children, and you had 25 cousins and sisters and aunts. And there was connection on a human level. And if you didn't like your mother, maybe you liked your aunt. And if your brother didn't get along with you, you had your cousin. And as the society got more complicated and people started traveling for jobs and so on, this kind of a culture broke up. Then we forget about this. We were reading about this. World War I came. Think about what World War I was about. The horrible things that people saw, the injuries and maiming of soldiers on both sides, the terrible battles, the families breaking up, and so on and so forth. A woman would have a baby, the husband would get killed, and so on and so forth. The sensitivity and the vigilance within the people that were calling borderline, they weren't equipped to cope with that much stress. And nowadays, the stress of living, of urban life, of American life, European life, Western life, not Western is happening all over. I was talking to somebody that told me that the young Indian women no longer wear saris. So culture and context changes, and the traits that created borderline that made life easier in 1900 have become handicaps in today's world. I mean, I live near a tunnel in New York City, and on Thursday and Friday, people are going home to New Jersey, and we are listening to traffic for 3 hours while we're working with the horns honking and so on. I mean, that did not happen in 1800.
It's too much sometimes. Yeah, it's too much.
So And the other factor, which is really important that I mentioned, is the internet, is the telephones,
Mm-hmm.
and the kids using the phones, and the things that were the support for these people in the world have been destroyed by the advances in the culture we live in with the electronics and so on.
Yes, agreed. That is a rabbit hole that I feel like we could do our own separate episode on altogether. Don't get me started. It was I used to go to a mind body spirit retreat in San Diego every year. I would take myself out, and the first thing you have to do before you can get into the gate is you have to turn off and basically turn over. You're not allowed to touch any technology the entire time you're there, and you have to stay there for a minimum of 3 weeks. And so just to reset. And so all you're doing is if it's not about the mind, body, or spirit, it's not allowed to come into your sphere for that length of time that you're there. And when I say I saw up close and firsthand the most incredible healing happening, people would come in there blind, Valerie, and then in a matter of weeks, their sight has restored. Like I watch people who they were like, I had cancer and now I don't. Like it was just these amazing stories and people that I got a chance to know and just connect with. And it's always had me thinking, why isn't this the approach to like everything? Like, why don't we take this little bubble? Because I'm watching real healing happening. Why isn't it available to the masses? And that's the part I think out of all of this that makes me the saddest, because you mentioned, you've been doing this for a while, right? And yes, you've seen some shifts, but then there's also, because of things like the internet and so forth, that have made it even worse, that the shame and the stigma is even more real. And you hear people, I actually had a therapist tell me, don't tell anybody that you have that when I was looking for help, right? And trying to get support. She said with her out loud voice, don't tell anyone you have this. And I was like, come again? After she had already said, I don't work with people who have BPD. And then she said, let me give you some advice. Don't tell anyone you have this, because this is going to mess things up for you career-wise, and also in your personally and professionally, is basically what she said. And she didn't know at the time that I was a career and leadership coach. And so I was just like, yeah, but I have solutions for that. Like, what I'm saying? I've got tools for that. But by the same token, that was like my introduction into this very real, kind of what I call the BPD land of it all. And so that's really why that question in particular fascinates me, is that it just seems to keep increasing. You turn on movies and everyone's throwing out borderline. Now it used to be bipolar, and now everybody's like throwing out borderline everywhere you go. And that's why I really wanted to talk to you, especially because you really are just, not just, but based in science and research. And I think it's so important to keep reiterating and driving that point home, that we aren't all just, overreacting emotional monsters.
Absolutely not. But I'll give you, can you top this? I will give you a top to what you just said. We all revere Marsha Linehan. Marsha Linehan told me,
set your calendars to tune in to part 2 of Valerie's episode next week and find out what Marsha Linehan personally told her. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you caught a nugget or two. Don't forget to join us each week for guest interviews, first-hand experiences from BPD warriors, and learning about tools designed to aid you along your recovery journey. And most importantly, don't forget to say your BPD mantra daily. Dear BPD, I no longer have room for you to control my life. My warrior spirit will take it from here. Till next time, wishing you an abundance of healing, self-love, and grace.
As today's chapter of I Can't Even Kill Myself Right comes to a close, we want to remind you that you are not alone in this journey. And don't forget to take a moment to explore the showmegrace.org website, our initiative for those moments when life feels overwhelming, all dedicated to helping you press pause on the chaos and embrace a moment of peace. If you find yourself in crisis or standing at a crossroads, remember, help is just a phone call away by simply dialing the crisis hotline 988, or contact your mental health provider and working your crisis action plan if you're considering harm to yourself or others. Your story doesn't end here. Your next chapter is yet to be written. Stay connected with us. Your insights, questions, and personal narratives fuel this journey. Wherever you tune in, be it Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or another platform, your engagement shapes our mission. Share your recovery journeys or pose questions for future episodes by reaching out through our website. Your voice could light the way for others or even feature alongside us as a guest or co-host.